Welcome to Disciple Dojo. In this episode, we're going to do something different. I am going to do some hands-on Bible nerd craftiness. If you saw the video recently we did here, where we're talking about pocket Bibles, compact Bibles, you'll know that I recently got a new kind of travel Bible, let's call it. It's not a pocket size. It won't quite fit in my pocket, but it is compact. It is easy to take with me, which is why I got it. One of the problems is, while it's easier than my study Bible to carry with me, it doesn't have any of the notes or any of the markings, underlines, anything. So I have to do some transferring. Now, this is not for study Bible, so I don't need all of the notes and all of the stuff, but there are some things that are in my main teaching Bible that are very helpful, and particularly some of the chiasms that I've marked in that study Bible. I want to mark them in this one. So I figured, why not just do that on camera and let you guys in on the process? There are a couple of chiastic passages in Scripture that sometimes get overlooked, and I want to have those at the ready in my travel Bible, that at a glance I can see the structure, I can show someone the structure of the passage overall. So the one we're going to look at today that I'm going to mark in this Bible is the chiastic structure of the flood account, Genesis 6, 7, 8, and 9. And so as we get ready to jump into that, if you appreciate Bible nerdy things like this, if you enjoy this channel, then we would love for you to let others know about it. And the best way you can do that, honestly, is by subscribing. And when you subscribe, enable notifications. And then, of course, liking, sharing, all that kind of stuff. That's currency in the world of online content creation. And it really does help independent channels like this one. So thank you to all of you who continue to support Disciple Dojo just by tapping a button or two. All right, let's do a quick intro to the Genesis chiasm, and then I'm going to actually mark it in this Bible, and you'll be able to see what it looks like in the end. So years ago, Old Testament scholar Gordon Wenham wrote an article titled The Coherence of the Flood Narrative. And it was in Vedas Testamentum, which is a journal for biblical studies. And it's pretty influential in terms of understanding the structure of the Genesis account. You know, there are scholars who say Genesis flood narrative was originally two different sources and they were sort of cobbled together. And that's why there's contradictions, redundancies, doublets, things like that in the text. Wenham argued, actually, no, there's a whole structure to this account, overarching chiastic structure that gives the account cohesiveness. It shows literary intention and ability on the part of the author. Now, whether it was originally one author or whether critical scholars are onto something by saying, no, there were probably originally some different sources, regardless, if somebody did craft individual sources together to create such an overarching literary structure, that in and of itself is incredibly impressive. So regardless of your view on documentary origins of the Pentateuch, Wenham's suggestion of the chiasm in the text is fairly compelling. At the very least, it's worth knowing as you read Genesis in its final form. So I just pulled up a digital copy of this from, I think this is the BYU library. You can find this anywhere online. Just search Gordon Wenham Genesis chiasm. But a chiasm, it comes from the Greek letter chi or chi, which is shaped like an X. And it's because there's this X pattern, like things narrow down to a point in the middle and then they go back to what they started with. So this phenomenon is called a chiasm. And the key thing to note about chiasm is the center of the chiasm is the main idea. Everything, it's like a mountaintop. Everything's building up to the pinnacle, the peak, and then working its way back. But this is possibly, at least in the Hebrew Bible, the longest chiasm, at least that I'm aware of. N.T. Wright has argued that Romans 9 through 11 is also one giant chiasm. And maybe if there's interest, let me know in the comments. We'll do a video because I need to mark that one in this Bible as well. But for now, I wanted to start with Genesis. And I wanted to note, if you're unfamiliar with it, let me zoom in here and you can see what Wenham is saying. The chiasm begins with point A, and that's the introduction of Noah. That's chapter 6, verse 10a. Then it moves point B to Shem, Ham, and Japheth. That's 10b. Then point C, the ark is to be built. Then in point D, the flood is announced. Then there's a covenant with Noah, then food in the ark, then the command to enter the ark, then 7 days waiting for flood, 7 days waiting for flood, entry to the ark. Then Yahweh shuts Noah in, 40 days of flood, the waters increase, the mountains are covered, 150 days the water prevail, and then we get to the center of the chiasm. God remembers Noah. That's chapter 8, verse 1. Then it works its way backwards. Again, there's 150 days where the waters no longer prevail, but they recede. And then as the mountains were covered, now the mountaintops become visible. And as the waters increased, now the waters abate. And just as there was 40-day mention of the flood, now there's 40 days at the end of the flood. And as Yahweh had shut Noah in, now Noah opens the window. And just as everyone had entered the ark, now the raven and the dove leave the ark. And the two mentions of 7 days of waiting for the flood are now correspond to 7 days waiting for the waters to recede. And that's mentioned twice. Then there was the command to enter the ark. Now there's the command to leave the ark. There had been discussion of what to eat in the ark. Now there is what to eat out of the ark. God had made the covenant with Noah. Now God makes the covenant with all flesh. And just as the flood had been announced, now what's announced is there will be no flood in the future. Mention of the ark to be built now corresponds to one final mention of the ark. Then we come back to an account with Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And then finally in verse 19, it ends again with mention of Noah. So this is this chiastic structure of the flood account. The whole account, the key point to it is that verse, chapter 8, verse 1, God remembered Noah. And of course, in the Bible, remember doesn't mean like God forgot. I forgot Noah's in the ark. To remember means to pay special attention to or to return and pick back up with something that was said before, to pay heed to turn one's attention toward in a very specific way. That is what happens in this cataclysmic, horrendous story that I don't know how it ever became synonymous with nursery decorations or children's story Bibles, singing songs about animals going by twosies on the arky. If you grew up in church, Sunday school settings, you know the song I'm talking about. But in fact, this is the darkest story, at least one of the darkest stories in the entire Bible. And so God remembering Noah and his covenant with him is absolutely crucial. And that's highlighted in the structure of the text itself. This also offers another explanation for what some critical scholars have said, these are doublets. These are examples of two originally different sources that contradict each other, and they're now in the text, and they still contradict each other because there's no reason for something to be said twice and changing certain details, and it's got to be two different authors. Well, maybe, or it's someone who's carefully crafting a narrative in a very specific way so that these sections reflect what was said earlier. So again, regardless of whether you think Wenham is correct or even whether you agree with how he lays out the chiasm, some have kind of simplified some of these or combined some of these. Regardless, it's important to know that it's there and to take it into account. So I want to have this in my study Bible, but this whole just writing it out with the points, that's not as intuitive. What I want to do is show it visually in the text. This cascading, this chiastic effect. How do I do that? Well, as someone who has 2 undergraduate degrees in art, I start thinking color. And I think showing it with a spectrum of colors is the way to go. So I'm going to be using Prismacolor color pencils. Now, I could do this with ink. In fact, in my larger study Bible, I use gel pens. All that matters is that you have a color that corresponds to each of the points on the chiasm. And it's helpful if you arrange them according to the color wheel, which if you learned in elementary art class, Roy G. Biv, red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet, it makes for a great way to show visual gradation that's perfect for communicating a chiasm. Also, I'm using color pencil because this is a compact Bible. The pages are thinner. I don't want to have a lot of bleed through. I want to keep this Bible as clean as possible. I just want the essential things. So when I make a note in the text about a Hebrew or a Greek word, I make sure to use a very fine point mechanical pencil, something that's easily erasable, something that doesn't bleed through the paper. These are just considerations that I have for this particular Bible. So I'm just going to transfer the chiastic structure into my Bible, where instead of using A, B, C, I'm going to use yellow, orange, red, and so on. You can do however you like. This is just a way I think is easy. And normally I just freehand it, but since I want this to look nice and not cluttered and not sloppy, I'm going to use a ruler to help the lines be a little bit straighter. So here's what it looks like. So it's hard to see on camera because I'm using a light color of yellow, but this is the center section of the chiasm, God remembering Noah. So now I'm going to take a slightly darker yellow and I'm going to go and highlight the passages on each side of this. And then I'm going to move on to a darker yellow, and then I'll move on to an orange, and then red, and then so on. I'm going to start at the center, work my way out using the structure that Wenham has proposed as my guide. So now when I come to Genesis 6, 7, 8, and 9, the Noah story, I have laid out on the page an overview. You know, I slightly adapted Wenham's chiasm. I'm not making it as precise as he is, but in general, it starts with the beginning of Noah's line and his righteousness, and then it builds up to God remembering him, and then back out to the end of Noah's generation and his unrighteousness in this case, as well as that of his sons. But now at a glance, I can see where I am in the Noah chiasm. And again, all of it focusing on the key point of the Noah story, which that even though the rest of the world looked like it had been brought back to a state of uncreation, decreation, nevertheless, God's faithful. He promised that salvation to all the ends of the earth would come through the seed of the woman, and Noah was in that line. So the promised plan that traces through the book of Genesis, you can see it right here at the center of the Noah story. So that's just an example of one of the ways that you can mark scripture with colors. I'm not a big fan of like gimmicky rainbow study Bibles. In fact, I do not like, I recommend you not use the Rainbow Study Bible for a number of reasons, primarily because that's not how scripture was written. But I think there is a way to use, in this case, the colors of the rainbow. And what better story to use the colors of the rainbow to show the chiasm of than the Noah flood story, which culminates in God sending the rainbow as a sign that that will never happen again. So hope this was helpful. Just wanted to do something a little different here on the channel. I promise we'll get back to Bible nerdy commentary, teaching videos. But again, this is just a one-off. Wanted to give you a peek behind the curtain. Let me know what you think. Would you like to see me do this in Romans 9 through 11 as well? Or is this enough? You get the idea. Regardless, that's all for now. Stay tuned for more Bible nerdery here at Disciple Dojo. In the meantime, as always, keep training.